Um, so yeah, I'm ready to start whenever you are.
Okay, I think we can start now.
Okay, perfect. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, yes, sure. Okay, so my name is SofyTofy, but mostly people recognize me for Unlucky Girl, which is a fan page dedicated to tell all the survival horror game for the PlayStation 2 Rule of Rose. And I can say in these last years, I become kind of popular in between the horror community for my experience with the genre, especially horror games. And of also you can realize I'm very much a fan of this kind of stuff. And I would say maybe not really an expert, but I'm someone who really enjoys this like kind of genre of like movies, music, games, and stuff like that.
Perfect. And what would you say is your relationship to kind of horror as a whole?
It is an interesting story, actually, maybe even a very long one, because and in my household, which is like old mindset Italian, because I'm from Italy, and there was like this situation going on way back, like around the 2000, 2006, or even after, that the people were starting to dislike the genre of horror. People were like, "Oh, hide your children. We need to protect our kids because horror is a dangerous medium." And stuff like that. And it's actually kind of funny because during that time, the program MTV was getting very popular, and I was a little girl, and usually when my parents would go to work, I was sent to my cousins or my grandparents for stay with them. And MTV was the program which my cousin always put on due to music, but there were situations where it started to also showcase anime programs or even horror movies. And back then I was like hiding, waiting for everyone to sleep so I could open it and watch those forbidden programs, if we could say that, which maybe it was not a good idea considering I was like a child. But I can say it was like the start of my passions for horror games or my horror genre in general, because I was like going late for watch these programs, or even with my PC. My dad got for the first time a PC around that time because Italy was very late with technology, and it was something new around that time for us, so it was very funny. And when my dad started to get even internet, because internet arrived even later for my house, I used it to watch like gameplays or even start to download those sites where you were able to get for free games. And between these, it was American McGee, which is a very dear game for me because it was my actual experience with the genre. And it's kind of funny because when I started to get into Alice, there was going on a little situation. One time I was doing my business, drawing the character during a school moment, and my teacher got me see me drawing like this creepy stuff. So he called my parents and started to have a long conversation about the danger of horror games. And you will never guess what game he was talking about. And yeah, it was Rule of Rose. Which is kind of funny because back then, it was the unfamous controversy moment. People were going in panic for Rule of Rose. Oh, this game is brutal. We need to ban this game. So it was kind of odd in a funny way that my connection with horror started with Alice, but it's more connected to Rule of Rose because after that there was that very sad period which I started to get controlled by my parents. I was not allowed to see some programs and some things, and it was kind of sad. But especially because during that time like a year or two, the sequel of Alice was announced, so I was like hyped for it. But then my dad appeared randomly in the release day with his game in his hands. It was like, you can play whatever you want, but of course be careful around the content and the usual. Oh, you can do whatever, but take in mind to not do these things in real life or stuff like that. And I was like, oh yes, sir. And after that, they don't care anymore about whatever I do. But it's kind of funny because, and it was kind of, I saw literally in first hands about the controversy, what horror games would get banned, get threatened by people. And of course, it pushed my curiosity around Rule of Rose, but I think maybe this entire story is perfect for another question.
Um, yeah, I actually want to ask, do you think growing up in Italy, because Italy has such a uh, big history with horror, especially with giallo films and everything like that. Do you think growing up in Italy affected how you perceive horror, or like kind of how you experienced it? It like how different is it compared to, let's say, another country outside of Italy?
Okay, so like I said earlier, Italy is kinda a funny place to be with because Giallo is extremely popular. I mean, kind of. Like Italy very love it horror history. They clearly have these passions around it, but it's kinda every present when, for example, there is that group in the class with it's a very little group with do not let any other joins in because they believe they are not perfect for join that group, even if it's basically the same kind of stuff. That's what I think Italy is, because even if Italy have a long history and made and created some genre which we now have to thanks for the horror to exist in the first place. For example, if it was not for Dario Argento, we could never ever had the Clock Tower. And the Clock Tower was one of the first games that created the stamina or the hide and seek mechanics, or better say, one of the first who did that kind of genre. But yet, Italy despises horror. It's a very weird, like, toxic relationship situation because Italy is extremely proud when something is made by Italians, but the moment someone else from another country does it, it's a very giant problem. For example, I do not like the genre of horror like Salo or Cannibal Holocaust, but if you ask an Italian about them, they will explain to you why they are actually very good examples of Italian horror media and stuff like that. But yet they are very, very annoyed on the idea if someone else from another country does something similar. Not like in a jealous way, like, oh, we did it first, but more like, oh, could they make this? Do they want to corrupt our children with this bullshit? And indeed, when the rule of law situation happened, it was kind of weird if you think about it, because of course the Giallo genre was very popular. Italy loves crime, for example. Still on this day, there are crimes programs based on real stories or fictional stories, but they really watered them down for the general Italian public. For example, something like Phenomena, Suspiria, or any other Dario Argento work, like that kind of giallo, which was crime mixed with horror, kinda do not exist anymore, because when you talk about giallo genre, it's more focused on like crime and comic relief genre, and it is kinda a sad thing. Like horror is still living in Italy. There is clear lots of love. For example, lots of creators of indie games comes from Italy. For example, the Dot Watch series, which is I mean the Broken Lord series like Don't Watch, Unfollow, and stuff like that are made by an Italian. Even the By Sweet Carol or Emothred are made by an Italian guy. But yet, Italy kinda don't want to remember this genre, even if they are one of the first countries that made what we recognize as the most popular tropes in the category. I hope I was clear on what I was trying to say.
Oh yeah, you were. Um,
Uh,
so kind of what you're saying is there's a strong kind of group of people who love horror and love creating horror in Italy, but as a whole, unless it's very specific kinds of horror that can be watered down, the general public and general populace of Italy won't really engage with it or treat it seriously or something that's worth it.
yeah, exactly, exactly like that.
Um, how do you think your kind of relationship with horror was affected by this relationship with horror that Italy has, and how kind of tucked away and censored it was in Italy, or or even just by your own family.
Mm. Could you please repeat the question, like
Yeah,
in another way? I think I not really understood what you're trying to say.
no, that's great.
Sorry,
No,
my
it's fine.
Italian.
It's fine. Just how was your kind of interest in horror kind of shaped by it being this thing that was kind of shied away from, that even like your parents were like, do not really watch this or engage with this.
Oh yeah, I am the only one in my family, for example, that loves horror as a genre because, for example, my mom likes thriller. We watch thrillers together, but horror is a big no for her. And my dad is one of those kinds who totally would avoid to see anything red. And he kinda is even the first one that even if he got me the game like years ago, is the one more like judgmental about my stuff, my passions. My mom is kind of weirded out about it, but she's like, it's just a hobby, so no big deal. But I always had this weird look about horror. For example, even my sisters or many people are like, oh yeah, horror. That's something like not in a negative way though. It's more like why like that mentality. Why would people like horror? Because I don't think it's their fault to be honest. Because if you think about it, the horror genre is mostly seen negative outside of people who are aware about what horror is. And indeed, I would say I'm not really upset about it when people are like, oh, that's odd, you like horror. I would never guess that because in the end of the day, horror is mostly seen negative. Like, for example, like I mentioned, Italy created many horror icons, but at the same time, the public, the society kind of push that mentality that horror is weird, so people who engage with it are weird as well. Even if you recognize the genre of horror, you're fully aware that actually it's not really that problematic, if you could say, with those words. So I would say I'm kind of glad to be grew into this situation because I mean I'm not saying oh I wish every game get banned or something like that. It's more that being experienced before ends with the Rule of Rose, which now is my favorite game of all times. Kinda helped me understand that there is still this ignorance around what is horror and the subcategories of horror and how people perceive them, which I'm extremely glad in the past few years, this situation is growing, especially with important events like the Oscars or Emmys or something like that, because now people are realizing that horror is something more than, for example, Silence of the Lamb or something like that, which there is still, though, a little bit of ignorance with horror games. They are not still seen as important. For example, there is not really a category of horror premiations for like games awards, or horror games are just seen as classic jump scare, 2 seconds thing scare, and that's it. Even if horror games are totally more than that, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I totally get what you're meaning.
Yeah.
Um, so, what are your thoughts on the use of sound design within horror? Like that could be anything from um, the way dialogue is done to sound effects to ambience to music and soundtracks. Feel it's How do you feel about it?
In my opinion, the sound effect is the most important part of an horror direction because lot of people believe horror is just gore into a screen, but actually that's just the trick because I was actually talking about a similar situation with a friend of mine not so long ago about how horror works. And if you think about it, what truly makes something like disgusting, scary, annoyed, or in a specific what you are supposed to feel in that moment way is the sound design. And like for example, I cannot stand personally some type of sounds, and for example, if I see like someone getting like killed on a horror without sound, I just am like, oh, that's kind of gory, and that's it. But with the sound, in my opinion, is totally something different because with the effects of what is going on, I feel more in depth about the scene in question, and I feel a little different reaction, like, oh, that's terrible, like, that sound you make. And something interesting about the horror per se in the genre is that, like you said, there are different categories because people think, oh, it's just jump scare, like random noise out of nowhere. But actually, it's a situation where it depends. Do you mind if I make like an example with the sound designs or not?
Oh no, you can make examples. That'd be perfect,
Okay,
actually.
for example, I think it's time for talk about Rule of Rose, which is my favorite game ever. And game does not actually have a sound design. I mean, there is, but not in the usual way of horror games. And when we talk about Rule of Rose, we talk mostly about ambience. The game is mostly based around the use of ambience and dialogue for make it work. For example, if we talk about sound designs, it's just regular basic stuff like oh this object fall into the ground, or this character make a little noise of surprise, but not something extreme like a sound that gives the idea of something crazy going on. It's mostly ambience. Uh, for example, Rule of Rose use the technique of using an orchestra for the sound of the soundtrack, and that's all you can hear about the game. Is mostly like a sound which you can hear around your gameplay. It's not like the sound change according on what you do. Let's compare it with Haunting Ground. And for example, Haunting Ground plays a lot with the sound design. When the situation is like kinda calm, the sound does not really exist. It's basically silent. Then it starts to slowly graduate into noises like something is coming close or hey, something is going to happen, like that tension with the sounds done with those effects and they are like coming slowly slowly and then the music starts to appear, which in Hunting Ground or Stalker games the sound of the music especially happens when a stalker comes out and want to grab you. But that's not the case for Rule of Rose. Rule of Rose is basically just ambience. There is a sound change when, for example, there is an enemy or a boss, but those are just cases of like the soundtrack of the enemy, the soundtrack of the boss, but are not like evolving into a graduation thing. It's mostly like soundtrack put inside the game, which if you compare it with the oldest games by the company, for example Moon RPG, which is not an horror game. Back then, in this RPG game, you could manually made your own soundtrack. In the game, you find this object which allows you to put a sound because the game is basically no noise, just the sound effects without music. You can update it. With Rule of Rose instead, you can later, after unlocking some stuff, put the music wherever you like, but it's mostly ambience according to the chapter. For example, in The Mermaid Princess, it's the only chapter of the game which the ambience goes totally different. It's not the usual violin, the usual more professional composed music, but it's just a piano making two noises and that's it. Which, in a way, I think is a style of the creators for say this chapter is touching serious stuff, which they kinda wanted to not really make it totally silent, but wanted also to kinda give that feeling too calm or something is off. Not in an extreme way, like Haunting Ground, that the music goes heavy when something is going on. For example, the stalkers with they are very funky, like disco music at first hearing them, but after a while they get kind of messy. You get starting confused and stressed because the music in Haunting Ground is especially made for like at one point stress you around because you're like, oh, you need to escape fast, you need to find a place to escape, a place to hide, or things goes worse because, for example, Fiona have a panic system. She goes crazy at one point if you don't manage to find something to do for her to be safe. While for a Rule of Rose, it's not the same thing. Jennifer don't have that kind of mechanic, so the music does not really change if you think about it. Even if you put a game on mute, does not really change at all the way you play it. While instead, if you play Haunting Ground, you need the music for understand what is going on. And wait, maybe you even asked about the sound design of the voices, if I recall.
Yeah, if you want to talk about voices and how they're used, you can.
Yes, sure, sir. I'm going to use the same examples. The funny thing about the voices is just that they are actually more used in modern games because in old games, if you even remember, I mean, you even collect the game like me when I saw your pictures online, and we can agree that back then, especially in the PlayStation 2 era, games do not add a very use voice acting. They were mostly used for cutscenes or like important moments. For example, returning with Rule of Rose or Haunting Ground. They have dialogue, but it's mostly done in specific way. For example, Rule of Rose, you actually, if you think about it, Rule of Rose and Haunting Ground use them in different ways. For example, in Haunting Ground, Fiona do not talk when she talks, or you click like an object and she say her opinions about it. Because if you think about it, you can say, oh, she's thinking in her mind, and when you make her speak, she calls Iwi, like with the classic Iwi sound effect. So you can think, oh, she's just not talking because she's thinking into her mind. And when there is another character talking, uh, there are those little noises made around, or there is a full dialogue about it. While for Rule of Rose, it's kinda different. Like Counting Ground, it have those moments where like the characters fully speak in voice acting or does not. But compared, it does not give that illusion of the characters mostly speaking to themselves because there are full long moments in dialogue which is mostly mute. And all you see is just like the voicing appearing like in the text, like reading the text of what is going on because the characters like move their mouth but they do not speak at all. They basically just make some noises like huh, like this, and that's like the main choice dialogue, which I think, honestly, my controversial take. I think it's a very interesting way to use it because, for example, if we mention Remothread, which have a full use of dialogue being used, like characters speak a lot. They have the basic sounds of the characters, like appearing by the stalkers, like them talking to themselves, like looking for you. But at one point it gets repetitive, which is the same thing you see in Clock Tower 3. The characters like speak like where are you or stuff like that. But with Rule of Rose or Haunting Ground or similars, the characters mostly make noises. So in a way, it kinda gives the feeling of them actually making the dialogue, even if just there's two or three same sample sounds. You have that weird effect that is not like something reused or repetitive. It's that effect that oh they are basically talking like in a Zelda way, if we could say that using another game example, and which I think is kinda a side effect of full voice acting in this kind of games because of course the characters cannot speak for infinite. They cannot say this different things because you put the voice actor in work, they say those lines, they use them in games, but of course those lines get repeated at one time. So in a way, it's like an interesting illusion for give the feeling the character is uh, is not like saying the same things over and over, even if all they do is just making a little sound with that, like their mouth or something like that.
That's perfect.
I hope I'm not talking too much.
Oh, jeez, you can't talk enough. It's
Okay, perfect.
yeah. Um, how well do you think sound design is utilized in horror? Do you think it's kind of underused? Do you think it's something that people leave as an afterthought because they think kind of the visuals or the gore or anything like that is more important?
Mm. I would say it's 50-50 in a way because it's a situation where it depends with the game we are or the title we are talking about. For example, in most old horror movies or even games, the silence was the main option. Like for example, in Clock Tower, if you think about it, most of the times all you hear is just Jennifer walking around the mansion. And when something is happening, it starts to appear the sound designs like the ambience music of like panic or like oh the stalker scissor man is coming. But even with that, the sound gives the sound of silence gives that feeling that nothing is happening. And there are, of course, other cases where the sound does a very major job with the work because it's actually used for like makes you fully like listening to something while you do your things. For example, in American Maggie Alice and or Alice Mother's Returns, which the sound is not really like something that depends on what the character is doing. Is mostly ambience. It like kind of change with Madness Returns. The sound change when, for example, there is an enemy, so the boss battle music appears and then disappear when the moment is over, and the normal host return. While for American McGee is mostly ambient music created by Chris Renna, and even when you fight the enemies, there is no change. The only change with the soundtrack is with the boss enemies, which they have their own soundtrack, and after that you return with the location music because the music changes to location. And while in games like Rule of Rose or Haunting Ground, the sound can return, like for example the stalker returned so the music reappear, or for example there is this chapter which reuse the same music sound used from another previous chapter from Rule of Rose, while the case for Omega Megalis or Mendes Returns is that each chapter, each word have a different sound. And or if you say another example, like Five Nights at Freddy's, which I think is kind of a controversial opinion because many people when talks about the Five Nights at Freddy's games, they basically say it's just silence and then the noise is caused by a jump scare. And after I replayed those games recently, and I kind of realized now that the game actually have a sound design. It's not really easy to like realize it. You need to be careful because, for example, I noticed that the characters actually moves around if you don't pick the camera. You can hear the steps coming close to you, and there is that little. It's very little compared to like clock tower or haunting ground. We use very loud noises for make you realize, oh, they are coming slowly with that music that evolves slowly around the situation. While in Five Nights at Freddy's is mostly random, and you can still hear those steps coming. And of course, the most we could say the most hated way of sound designs, which is the loud music popping up for create a reaction out of the viewer, which is now called the jump scare. Which, if you think about it, is not really a vision effect; it's most a sound effect because oh, this loud music appears, so you get oh, you jump, you like, oh, make a noise because of it. And it's not really because of the game over, but it's mostly because, like, I go to a friend and I scream out of nowhere. They, of course, do not expect that, so they, like, scream as well because, like, oh, why you scream out of nowhere? And, and I think this thing of this style of horror, I do see why it kind of become the black sheep of the genre because people do not use that feeling of being scared with slow patience about it. For example, let's quote another game, Silent Hill, which is very slow in the term of like the story or even with the it ways sound design or even gameplay is very slow because the reaction is supposed to get slow at the viewer. The player need to be totally invested for understand what is going on, put the puzzle together, and give a feelings. And even the music is mostly ambience, but it works slowly with the player. While in games like Five Nights at Freddy's or similars, there is the loud noises that is made for create that out of nowhere reaction out of you, which I would say it's not really like a reaction out of scare, like in the other horror games where, for example, when the stalker is coming up, like I mentioned early, Haunting Ground, the sound design can be so extremely pushy that you start to kind of get stressed out because the sound is not disappearing. You're like feeling that situation of being stuck because the stalker is still following you. The music is getting more confusing, more like corrupted to itself. And you just start to get stressed because you don't want to be caught. So you're like trying to survive, like the survival genre is named of. While in Final Freddy, the music appear, like the sound design of the schemes appear, you get scared, but it's just 2 seconds, so it's just more a laughing kind of scare, like, oh, haha, that scares me. And I think that's the difference in the end of the way, because in the end, one sound design was created for voluntary mess up with the viewer, to mess up with the player, to mess up with your emotions. Another one is mostly like made for calm or more just like for put a sound, so when you play you can hear a little bit of music, so you have something to hear while you are experiencing it. While in Five Nights at Freddy's is more like 1 second thing, and you can move on from the next playthrough where the same thing happen, which yeah, I think I totally understand why it's not really seen view positively, because if you think about it, it's mostly like cheap, a cheap way for create a reaction. Can I mention another example, if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course you can.
Recently, I played another controversial game, which is Horses, and in my opinion, the sound design of it was very not used well, and because it's many people talks about it. When I read the criticism, it was mostly for the for the design of the aspect, for example, the gore scenes, the nudity. But in my opinion, the most weird job the game did was with the sound design. And for example, the music is extremely loud. It happens out of nowhere, and it's like that sound of I don't know how to explain it, but it's basically not really even a music. It's just corrupted noises put together for create like a sound of distortion. Most of the music is samples, like traditional music samples, if they use them, because the game is silent. The game does not even really have a soundtrack, and when it does, is sample music of like copyright free sound effects, or is this like corrupted sound which is made for create a reaction out of you? It's like the music saying, oh, something awful is happening, something awful is happening. In my opinion, that's what I generally dislike, and I think it's the worst thing someone could do in a horror game, because in my opinion you need to find a good balance with the music, the imagery, the voice acting, the story. It need to be balanced, but with horses it's kind of like they got scared of the viewer not being scared of the experience of the game, so they put extreme scenes, they put loud music, hoping that the viewer have a reaction, especially negative, out of it. And in my opinion, I don't like that direction, because when someone does that, it gives me the feeling that they are trying, like, I would not say too hard, but I would say they are trying to make a reaction out of the viewer by force, which is, in my opinion, not a good way to do something. Um, if I want to mention like another game like the one previously mentioned, like Haunting Ground or Clock Tower, or even by Sweet Carol or Remote Red or another stalker mechanic game, the sound evolves around if the stalker, the enemy, or something is happening. But the sound also warns you about it because there is the in between, which is basically that sound effect that start to appear slowly, that like the music of the character in question is slowly starting to appear. Or for example, you see Iwi from Mountain Ground, which is the dog character, and starting to move around, or even slowly you hear the growl the animal is making. So you're like, oh, I need to get ready because something is going on. While in horses, like Five Nights at Freddy's, it's out of nowhere. The sound appears even loud. I had to put the sound very low at one point because I don't know if you are present like the effect when a stereo is broken and it makes everything loud out of nowhere and you try to put it off because it's an annoying like feeling in your ear. That's what I felt about this game. Of course, I'm not saying it like in a negative way to its creators or something. It's just for returning to your question. Sound design is extremely important for horror games. It is a very important part of the experience. Many creators knows it, so they use it like it's supposed to be. But sadly, it's a direction which others realized is the most easy way for get a reaction out of people, which in my opinion is most of the time done very poorly for the experience of who is experiencing that piece of work.
All right. Uh, yeah, that's perfect. I totally agree with what you said. And how
Perfect,
so many
perfect.
people kind of use it cheaply and don't really put thought into it other than cheap scares. But when it's done right, it's very important.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do you think that sound design in horror is underappreciated? Like that the general consumer who's engaging with horror and everything like that. Do you think they're able to appreciate sound design, or do you think they just view it as unimportant or as like kind of not as um, engaging as like the visuals or gore or anything like that?
I would lie to myself if I say something like, "Oh no, that's not true. People like sound designs." But to be honest, I think it's the most underviewed part of a horror game or horror movie or anything horror. Because, for example, if you go to Twitter or any platform, you see mostly people talking about the designs, talking about the scenes in questions, talking about, for example, let's mention a movie. Did you ever saw the Terrifier
Uh,
or that kind of gore movies?
yeah, yeah.
I if you like see a discussion about this movie or something like that, you notice how no one talks about the sound design. Everything is based on the visuals. Everything is based on the characters reacting or the situation. The sound design is very, very pushed away. And even with movies which have a very important sound design working, for example, say Silence of the Lambs, which is one of my favorites horror movies, or for example, even Perfect Blue. Perfect Blue is another movie which, in my opinion, does an amazing sound design because they take something so childish, so simple, like the idol music, and use them in a very out of context moment, which is spectacular in my opinion. But the discussion around the sound designs is very, very rare to find. People always talk about aesthetic. People talks mostly about like the scenes, that moment, which was oh that cursed moment. And if they talk about the sound design, Sadly, it's always for meme reasons. For example, like I said in Perfect Blue, oh, don't put this song into an ascension, ha 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 ha. And you're like, oh yeah, I kind of get the meme, but it's kind of sad that a music direction is mostly put beside. If it's mentioned, it's always for a meme or something aside because horror sound designs is extremely well. I'm glad that they finally are realizing it is important, like Sinners, which one of the main soundtrack piece was even put into a nominee, if I remember correctly, which I'm very glad finally horror design is ben, is well seen. I think the movie that made people realize that the sound design is important is, for example, The Substance, which again it's a movie which people mostly talks about the visuals, story, but you also see people talking about the soundtrack, talking about that direction because it is important as well. The sound, especially in Substance, does a very important job to fit into the scene. So when you think about a scene, you obligatory think also about the music which is affected. So you are obligated to talk about the sound design. But sadly, lots of people push aside that and when you see discuss about it, it's mostly by passionate fans and or people who talks about like that direction. But yeah, if I would say my final answer, I would definitely respond with sadly, as much is important, as much there are lots of good examples on how the sound effect works. It's sadly mostly ignored by the people or the general audience which talks about this kind of pieces because the gore, the scenery, the visuals are what most people want to talk about.
Um, yeah, totally agree. That it does seem, unless it particularly stands out for either a good or a bad reason, it seems most people don't generally see how important sound design can really be within horror.
Yeah, exactly.
In your opinion, what piece of horror you sound design the best? Like what utilizes it in the most um what's the word I'm looking for? Effective way. Like which use sound design to add the most to the overall experience.
Let me think about it because this is an actual good question. I'm thinking to various answers.
Yeah, it's
Mm, I would say in movie directions, and it's not really this is the best one. It's my personal favorite. I would say Suspiria in a movie direction way. I know it's kind of weird to say Suspiria with all the examples, but in my opinion, the visuals and the sound are very good mixed. So I totally love the way Suspiria handles it. It's a very iconic host as well. Um, for game direction, even if I am a The Rule of Rose fan, I would say Haunting Ground because, like I said early, it managed the direction with the music spectacularly. It evolves with it plays with you. And for example, I did not mention that the game sometimes put tricks on you. It makes you think you are in a safe zone, for then out of nowhere plays around with it. And I think it's very majestic made. And for say another example with sound design, mm, In music, I would say Silent Hill 1, and which in my opinion is underappreciated compared to the other Silent Hills, especially the second one. But in my opinion, the first one, especially with um, the rest, especially the fact of being also very early compared to like Silent Hill 2, which makes things step thanks to the technology of the PlayStation 2, is very, very well done. There are some host or sound designs, which, by the way, is mostly done with reused assets, which is mostly done with samples. And generally, I love Silent Hill music is mostly done with something we recognize, but twisted in a totally new way. So when you hear it, you have no idea that the music is like something that technically exists because it's a sample. I realized that I said accidentally assets. I mean sample. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, you're fine. Don't worry. Don't worry.
uh, which, in my opinion, does a majestic job at using something that already exists, but in a totally new direction. So also I put Pan's Labyrinth because kind of like horror music, I feel it's underappreciated, or sound design is when it does not play around with the fears, but it kind of calls the viewer, which, in my opinion, Pan's Labyrinth with the lullaby theme especially does a majestic job at gives you like a feeling of like comfort, which is the same thing why I love Rule of Rose Host, which most of the times it plays with the intention of like comfort you rather than scare you. In my opinion, it's a direction in sound design of horror genre which is very underappreciated because it's important to use effects for scare the player or scare the viewer or scare anyone else. But I think it's also powerful when the music is made for kinda calms you, kinda gives that feeling that you are safe.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to just kind of talk a bit more about Silent Hill 1, which obviously you mentioned before, and how it takes recognizable things and twists and morphs them in twisted ways. It's so much of that soundtrack is sounds so kind of mechanical, but in an organic way.
Oh
Like
yeah,
the metal is living and breathing, but being twisted and morphed and manipulated in this way, and which is almost screaming in pain. Um, what the example, what I compare it to is like I compare it as a auditory. It's like an auditory adaptation of Tetsuo the Iron Man, if you know that movie.
oh yeah, I know that movie. Actually, I'm glad you told about that because I was actually kind of forgetting about that direction. If you don't mind, I also will talk about that.
Oh no, you can totally talk about that.
Something I love about the games I mentioned, or even movies, is that the music is made for gives a feeling, and or like the music transform into something else entirely. You said the mechanical breathing, which is also something I recognize in American McGee. For example, the whole soundtrack was entirely made by using toys, music instruments, or like childish stuff for gives that feelings of childhood destroyed. But in my personal opinion, the best way was handled like in Rule of Rose or even by Sweet Carol. And for example, the violin. Both games use the violin for duplicate or imitate a feeling of agony. In my opinion, it's the best way you could handle it. For example, in Rule of Rose, um, uh, you see the Mermaid Princess, this character, which is a disturbed view of this girl who lives in this orphanage with the protagonist Jennifer, which you see the worst of her, the representation of trauma itself. And as much as the sound design of that boss is sadly used horribly, because I don't know why the team throw using karate, yeah, yeah noises in the character was a good idea. In my opinion, it did an amazing job with the music. The music fixed that issue of the sound design with the voice actors because the music instead imitates use the violin for duplicate like screaming to duplicate that feeling which you are not sure if the intent of the creators were to like imitate the screaming of pain of the character or duplicate the like that mermaid feeling because the boss is a mermaid which like is a mermaid screaming or like the mermaid trying to persuade you in a way. But in my opinion, it could be both, and that's very spectacular. And if I recall, even by Sweet Carol used something similar, which use just like the old Disney, which actually I remember some time ago. I contacted one of the music helpers for By Sweet Carol, and they told me that while making the game, they made sure they used like the same palette instruments that all the Disney did for give that feeling of nostalgia, old cartoons. And if you think about it, old cartoons used music for make a sound effect like a character screaming, which also was used in Godzilla. The sound of the kaiju was made with the instruments like the guitar or the violin or the cello for gives that feeling of like a noise made by that character. And by Sweet Carol follows the same strategic idea, which use the instruments for give that feelings like you can hear some sound imitating noises, imitating screams. And in my opinion, it's the best way to use an instrument. That idea of faking a voice which is actually made by an instrument.
Yeah, um, I think that yeah, it's sorry.
It's
um,
okay, it's okay.
yeah, I just think all your um thoughts are fantastic, and I just thank you for giving giving them. But yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying and how Rule of Rose, Spice Sweet Carol uses all that. Um, yeah, just fantastic. Thank you again. Um, yeah, next question. um, does any particular moment in your mind kind of stand out as like a good use of sound design in kind of any horror thing, movie, video game, anything like that? Just one particular moment.
That's a very hard question because I have many iconic moments in mind.
Well, if you want
I'm
to give
going
a few, you can. Don't worry.
I'm going to make a compilation every iconic moment. Okay, so I will say, of course, again, Rule of Rose, but not with a mermaid this time. I'm going to include the final act of the game, which I'm not going to go in depth with it because I don't want to give spoilers, and which it's which in the final chapter of the game it uses like a piano soundtrack, which in my opinion is the best way for end a game. Using after all the agony, all of the awful things you see, finishing the game with a bittersweet note is the best way to end something in my opinion. Um, for Silent Hill, there are too many good moments to be honest, and For example, it's very hard to say with Silent Hill because, in my opinion, the music is very majestic man handled in all of their games, and so I would say, for example, I have one. I have one. When there is the "Stand by Me, Harry, please" moment with Lisa and Harry, when the not not tomorrow music start plays, it's a very iconic moment. And in my opinion, one of my favorite soundtracks in the entire game. The scene, it really evolves with the sadness of the character, which is voice acted in that moment with the pain going on, and the music goes extremely sad. And it's kind of funny, my examples so far are not really horror, but more sad moments in the horror games. And but the next one is going to be scary. Okay, so returning with Haunting Ground, I think Daniela was very well handled with the music and sound designs, especially the moments where she lose her minds, where she start to scream Azot, Azot. It start to get distorted, confused, and in my opinion, those are the most iconic moments in the game for a very good logical reason because it truly gives that feeling of the characters paranoia going into the extreme. So you're like, oh, I need to get ready because things are going to get extremely awful now. And making a modern game example, mm, what I could use, what I could use. Um, 1 second. I would also say, for example, using modern games, Fear and Hunger is also, in my opinion, as much the music is mostly like creepy ambience. In my opinion, those are very a magic job at give that eerie feeling with with the player, especially when like a battle starts. There is that like the noises which pops up, which it's kind of silly, but it does really a very good effect to remind you that everything is truly awful in this universe. So there is no peace. Everything is like tormented in obscurity. Is quiet, but not really, because there is that fear that something is hiding behind the scenes, waiting for you. And I would also mention between my favorites of this year, No, I'm Not Human, or even Mouthwashing, which I'm glad that they are also games which mostly people recognize for the soundtrack because, in my opinion, they are extremely good with the use, but in a different way. For example, mouthwashing is the classic genre of game that plays around with the moment or even the situation. It can play like a silly music or out of nowhere it evolves into madness. Or with No, I'm Not Human, which is mostly ambience. And another actually very less talked game, which is Kalimara, which is by the same publisher. In my opinion, the music is mostly like medieval genre because of the time setting. But I love how it also gives that feelings of like vintage, but also distorted in a way. Um, there are honestly other good examples of good sound design used in games. So I think I will stop for now, or I'll talk since tomorrow.
Uh, yeah, I think every example you gave are fantastic. Even moments that aren't particularly scary, like the Lisa
Oh
example
yeah,
you
yeah.
gave. I think they're all fantastic choices for the use of sound design um, within this kind of genre.
Yeah, to be honest, if you don't mind opening this little topic, I think that's one of the main issues with the general audience with horror because everyone thinks horror need to scare you, just to scare you. Like, for example, games like Horses and Friday Night at Freddy's, which mostly focus on the idea to scare you. But in my opinion, the best horror is when is aware of the moment, is aware that you need to be quiet, you need to be happy, you need to be calm, sad. Horror mostly plays with all of your emotions, not only scares. In my opinion, that's the best way you could play with this genre. It's not just, oh my god, jump scare, but it's a mix of emotions put all together.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree that it's that so many people just kind of view horror as, oh, it's only meant to scare. It can't be nothing else. And that they don't allow it to kind of tell a story that kind of gives other emotions like that. Yeah.
By the way, I forgot to mention by Sweet Carol between my favorites of the year, but let's pretend I said it.
Uh, don't worry about it too much. But yeah. Next question is, which piece of horror utilized silence the best?
Wait, could you repeat that? It kind of. I did not hear the question.
Which piece of horror utilized silence the best? They kind of utilized just complete silence, or silencing soundtrack or anything like that.
Hmm. Hmm. That's a good question. I think I kind of answered this question early accidentally by saying the first clock tower, aka clock tower, the first sphere, or rewind with the new released one. Because, like I said, the game mostly plays silent, and you only hear steps, and if you think about it, the game just plays and out the silent. And even if you happen to play the game mute, it's not an issue compared to many other horror games because when, like, for example, um, uh, Scissor Man appears, you can see it. It gives you time to process and escape and find a solution. So I think it's an example of a game that properly manages its silent moments with it. Um, uh, mm, I would not really say silent or something, but I would. I don't know if it also fits the idea of like the sound being present, but it's mostly like calm. You mean totally silent, silent?
Just kind of anything really. Just like even just no music, just kind of very quiet, like the clock tower thing you were mentioning, where it's just Jennifer's kind of walking. Um,
Mm.
that's a perfect example you can use. But even if you can think of something that uses just complete silence, you can give it. But if you can't, that's fine.
It's not really that. It's that there are lots of examples of like games playing with silent, but the issue is it's mostly just for like a moment or like there is always like a little sound between going on. For example, I was thinking at Broken Lord of Watts with the sound is present, but it's mostly like silent calm. It's not like exaggerating, except for just so simple moments. Or even Silent Hill, Rule of Rose, or this one said, which use a lot the silent moment for, say, like a moment of quietness. For example, I would actually say mm, um, uh, the use of like silent is mostly, if you think about it, used by Clock Tower inspired games because they are still aware of the use like of quietness because they always play with the idea that the sound should be appeared when like the enemy is coming. So it's mostly played with soft or like non-existent music because I also have in mind like Clock Tower 2, Clock Tower 3. or even Ghosted. Or the most controversial take is also Night Cry, but that's a totally different story of quiet game because the game plays quiet, but because it was mistakenly made it quiet because the game have a soundtrack, but it's not used in the game. So you're like just playing this game quiet most of the time, and you're like, okay, there is the sound. Does this game have a sound? Uh, and actually, there is a game. There is a game, and which I played some days ago. 1 second, let me grab the name because I forgot about it. And I hope you don't mind me grabbing my Steam library because I can't remember this game.
Oh, it's grand. Don't worry. Take all the time you need.
Where is? And mhm. Cannot find this game. Okay. It's The Children of Clay. I don't know if you heard about this game. Um, The Children of Clay is a very short game, and does it have a soundtrack, but it's mostly like like ambient music, which is very very calm at the start, and then it deteriorates during the ending. When the moments get crazy with it. It's not really silent, but in my opinion, it's like an amazing example of game that mostly plays it quiet with its soundtrack. And yeah, maybe it's not really the topic you were asking for, but
Oh no, no,
I
that's
put.
perfect. Don't worry. Don't worry about it.
I would also mention like Iron Lang because if I recall, I mean it's been years since last time I toasted it, but if I recall correctly, the game does not really have like a giant soundtrack. It's mostly like ambient noises and you looking around with this like machine. Um, um, correct me if I'm wrong about Iron Lang because I remember like the soundtrack was mostly the noises of like the ship. Like you were doing your job with this little ship, checking for these creatures around, and that's basically the soundtrack. Just the noises of the things you are doing
Yeah,
around it.
yeah. I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
that's right about Iron Lung.
yeah, perfect. Like there is no music. The music is created by the things you do around.
Uh, yeah. I think those are all perfect examples, and I can't. And thank you very much for them.
No problem, no problem. I actually, to be honest, I kind of said the previous example of silent music early because, like I said, even ourselves is basically a silent game. It's literally just silent without soundtrack except for some moments. But to be honest, I would not say a best example or just like what I mentioned, the Night Cry. In my opinion, those are the not to follow example on how to use no soundtrack in your game because it gives the feeling of something is missing. Is this coded correctly rather than oh look at the ambience, it's very silent, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I get what you mean. Exactly. Um, what are any soundtracks you believe added the most to like a piece of horror?
Of course, Silent Hill, no matter which game. I would also, to be honest, mention Silent Hill F, which of course is kind of new and people kind of don't talk about it. I mean, they talk about it, but in my opinion, the music is mostly pushed aside, which in my opinion is another amazing example, especially considering the mastermind behind it, which made all the soundtrack. You know what I'm talking about, and
Yeah,
yeah, and like you need obligatory to mention Silent Hill around soundtracks, and I would Not, I'm not like actually thinking about it now. I did not totally mention Resident Evil, which Resident Evil music is very iconic, and to be honest, I kind of feel bad not mentioning it around, which I would say is a very good soundtrack if we talk about iconic music for games. Personally, it's not like an example on what I would use for like how horror soundtrack works, but for the example we said earlier. But to be honest, I totally would mention Resident Evil like an iconic, but it's more a personal thing. I'm not saying oh Resident Evil sucks or something like that. It's more a personal taste, and so yeah, I would say in an iconic way, there are some pieces of Resident Evil soundtrack I think about. For example, the trumpet from the cat version of the first Resident Evil.
Yeah.
The one which you are wondering, are these parts? Okay, jokes aside. Mm, actually, oh my god, I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. How could I? How could I forget the most important piece of music or soundtrack in gaming history? Obscure games. I totally forgot about obscure games, especially the second game, which is a very amazing soundtrack. I totally would put it in my top music for games easily. And I'd also include American or even Phenomena.
Hmm.
I mean Phantasmagoria. Phantasmagoria. I always mix up. Which is also soundtrack. It's kinda underappreciated. I would also say I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, the video game adaptation, have a very good soundtrack. Mostly is silly because, especially when you talk with AM, is mostly like being a fool of himself. So most of the soundtrack is not really creepy. It's mostly him being like God playing, but still, it's a soundtrack that I do think about sometimes. And of course, Rule of Laws. I cannot forget about Rule of Laws or Haunting Ground, as our Broken already mentions. And maybe not really horror games, but I do include them as horror because, of course, the series they are based on is technically fantasy horror, which is the Berserk games, which the host by Susumi Rasawa are underappreciated in my opinion. Or, of course, I would also mention Night of the Consumers, which is another very unappreciated soundtrack, especially the feelings of the stress caused by the fact that you are overworked, there are the clients disturbing you, and you're trying to escape them. It's a very interesting way, and in my opinion, the soundtrack makes an amazing direction to push that stress. And for do not give too much as an examples, I think I will end with Buckshot Roulette, which actually the soundtrack is mostly ambience, but in a very different way. It's not like the classic type, but more like disco type, like you are into a party and you are there doing your things and you hear this music happening when you are doing your stuff into this disco time. So it's as well another soundtrack that I think about.
Uh, yeah, I think those are all perfect examples. I know I keep saying that with all your answers, but and it's true. I think they're all great examples. If I could add one myself personally, I would
Yeah, sure.
mention both the Siren games, like the Forbidden Siren
Oh,
games.
I
I
always forget. I always forget about them. In my defense, I dropped that series because it was getting a rage out of me because it's very hard. But I downloaded them. I plan to return on it and beat them like they should be.
yeah, but I think both of those games use the first two games use their soundtracks amazingly. I love the soundtracks of those games, and I think they add very much to the experience.
Oh yeah, those. I totally agree. Like for what I remember in my all the playthrough. The sound was very, very good.
Yeah. What are some things that you believe are underutilized in horror sound design? Like even if it's just certain, uh, even if it's just like you wish silence would be used more, or even if you like, I wish these kinds of sounds would be used more, or just kind of techniques or anything like that. What do you think would be are kind of underutilized?
Mm. Not what I'm going to say. Maybe it's kind of weird, but it's more an advice rather than a criticism because I kind of think that, of course, I cannot really tell it's every game doing it because there are lots of modern games which are the total opposite of what I'm saying. It's more that I think mostly with like movies, and there is this issue that people kind of fear the idea of like calls moment, like silent moment. They need to put entirely soundtracks or put noises. And it's not really an horror issue, it's more a general issue. So I always advise people to balance it, to make more quiet, to make more like let the character breathe, let the character realize around what is going on in quiet. For example, a very common criticism you see around is the too much dialogue, and which dialogue is technically a sound design. I think I can put it right.
Yeah, yeah, you can.
So my only advice is to like do not exaggerate with the audio design, the over explanation, the not letting the player or the viewer understand or give them quiet moments because, in my opinion, having those moments of silence, having those moments you are slowly realizing something or slowly the music is trying to work without being too fast, is taking its time, is the best experience of any horror. Is the best experience, like to slowly going into things, not fast, not like jump scare out of nowhere. It's quiet, gives the idea of the situation, more playing it around, more like give the kind of say leave the viewer being played rather than oh this or that, oh you should feel like this, you should feel like that. Gives the player the feelings according on how they perceive it, the situation. Like the games I criticized early, they did not give time, they did not give patience, they needed to work and fast, which in my opinion is an issue. You need to have time for something to work. And besides that, for sound designs, I would also say to not be afraid to use total silent moment, to not be afraid to not using a soundtrack. Just because, in my opinion, maybe we need more quiet. We need more of that, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree. 100% the use of silence should be um kind of be done more within horror. I think it's underutilized because so many people are kind of scared to use it because they lose the attention of people. But I think when you use it effectively, it's a very powerful tool. Yeah, that's basically it.
How long it was the interview? Maybe we did way more than Diario.
Well, I think we're just coming up to an hour and a half now. So
Damn.
yeah,
By the way, I'm sorry if I repeated myself because, like I said, I'm Italian. I'm doing my best to, I still need to work out with the use of terms, so I apologize for that.
Do not apologize at all for anything. You have no reason to apologize. You've
Okay,
done
perfect.
absolutely amazing. I cannot thank you enough for being a part of this interview. Do you have any kind of final closing thoughts or um, things you want to get out there, thoughts you want to kind of express within this context, or even just things you want to advertise for yourself?
It's more a little reminder because I said this opinion some days ago on my Instagram stories, and there are some people who speculate that the horror is dead, the horror is ruined, that now is everything a cheap jump scare. And I used to believe like that as well, but more I got into horror games, more I realized that there are so many. There are so many examples, there are so many wonderful titles that shows how actually the genre is evolving. Sometimes it return in the classic roots, for example, the Resident Evil, Silent Hill-esque inspired games, or other times it get into a more experimental area or totally different. But the horror genre is always a surprise because it always tries to be something and do not follow the idea that you need to make something new because something I learned about horror games is that it's always a genre born out of love and born by giving tributes or inspiration by other works. Indeed, for example, like I said, the sound choices that were used, for example, in Phenomena, um, we call it in Italian profondo rosso, which is deep red, and in English or Phantasmagoria or Silent Hill or even more old stuff, they are like a testimony where the sound designs is getting an evolution. Like these old pieces, these old works inspire new ones to be made. There are lots of amazing new game soundtracks, like I mentioned, for example, Mouth Washing by Sweet Carol, No I'm Not Human, or even more, that are showing how much there is dedication around this genre, and not only for the game or the view reasons, but especially for the sound designs. And compared to what people think that Five Nights at Freddy's are the only horror games that exist, are totally wrong because yeah, there are games that focus on just a jump scare and that's it, but there are many, many, many others, which I also forgot to mention Signalis, so I'm going to mention it right here, which I just listened to the soundtrack recently and it's freaking spectacular. So, yeah. Oh, also Little Goody Two Shoes, another amazing soundtrack which I would include in the mention. So, what I'm trying to say in short is the genre is not evolving in its story, it's not only evolving in its style, in its art direction, it's totally evolving in every direction, in every side, in every view. So even the music is getting more and more loud, and in sense that is now getting a very like it deserved to be view of appreciation with the horror genre. Sadly, there are still people who ignores it, but I'm glad to see that someone is opening their ears and be like, oh hey, this is actually a very good sound design.
Yeah, um, I totally agree, 100%. And I just want to say thank you very much for agreeing to be a part of this.
No, no problem. You know, for everything, I'm always in DMs
Yeah,
or around.
yeah. Um, if I ever think of any more questions I want to ask about this, I'll 100% let you know.
No
Um,
problem.
I don't know kind of what else to say or anything. Is there anything you want to say to the people, advertise yourself, advertise things you like, anything like that?
Oh, I need to present myself.
Um,
Like
if you if you want to, or you don't have to. It's just kind of.
I, I think I did it in the start, but I can do it again, no issue. Like I said, I'm SofyTofy. I most of my socials have the same name, but except some, for example, Twitter or Blue Sky, which I'm under the name Unlucky Girl. I'm mostly a Rule of Rose fan page. I mostly dedicate myself into this game, but I also talks about other forgotten or underappreciated horror games, old or news, or promote and talks about new releases. I cannot deny, maybe compared to other pages, I'm still not fully 100% an expert, but I could say I'm a good fan, would just want to have fun and discover more things around. Who knows, maybe in a future, if someone interview me again, I have better examples or better view because I played more stuff, which is my dedication to play more and more, or even watch more and more horror related stuff.
Uh, that's perfect. Thank you very much again for coming here and being
Problem.
here. And yeah, I think that's it. So thank you very much again. Uh, bye.
Bye. Thank you a
Bye.
lot for this interview. Seriously, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Okay. Uh, bye.
Bye bye.